The day I buried my father, my wife's family buried me too. Not in the ground, but in insults, mockery, and shame. They stood 10 feet from his casket making plans for my wife's life after our divorce. I heard every word. My wife heard every word. She said nothing. I decided that day I was done fighting for respect I'd never get, done with a marriage held together by my effort alone. Then 72 hours later, my bank account had 7 figures in it. And suddenly, every single one of them was knocking on my door. But not to apologize. Hello everyone, welcome to another story that will take you on an emotional journey. Where are you watching from today? Drop it in the comments below. I love connecting with each of you. If this is your first time here, you've stumbled onto something special. Hit subscribe right now because what happens next in this story, trust me, you won't want to miss a single minute. David Chen stood at his father's graveside, the wind cutting through his threadbare thrift store suit. 20 people had shown up, mostly his dad's friends from the auto shop. The modest gathering felt warm despite the cold weather, except for the 4 people standing apart from everyone else. The Whitmores, his wife's family. They checked their phones, whispered among themselves, and made no effort to hide their disdain. His wife Jessica stood beside him, but the 6 inches between them might as well have been miles. "He looks pathetic," Patricia Whitmore whispered just loud enough for David to hear. That suit probably came from Goodwill. It had. Richard Whitmore, Jessica's father, chuckled and checked his Rolex. "How much longer is this going to take?" "We have that reservation at Bellini's." Jessica stared at the ground, saying nothing. David's hands trembled as he tried to read the poem his father had loved. His voice cracked on the final line. When he looked up, Patricia was laughing at something on her phone. As mourners placed white carnations on the casket, Brandon, Jessica's brother, stage whispered to his wife, "At least when Jessica finally wises up and divorces him, there won't be any assets to split." They all laughed. Jessica just clutched her purse tighter. The funeral director nodded that it was time to leave. As people began drifting away, David noticed a man in an expensive charcoal suit standing at a distance. The stranger watched intently, his posture professional, out of place among the mechanics and diner waitresses who made up his father's social circle. The man approached as the cemetery emptied, extending a business card. "Mr. Chen. Thomas Brennan, estate attorney." His eyes were kind but serious. "I need to speak with you privately." "Tomorrow." "It's about your father's estate." David stared at the card, confused. "Estate? My dad was a mechanic. He lived in a 1-bedroom apartment." Thomas Brennan's expression gave nothing away. "Tomorrow. 10 o'clock. My office." He glanced at the Whitmores, who were watching. "Come alone." As David pocketed the card, Brandon appeared beside Jessica, placing his hand on her shoulder. "Mom and Dad are waiting. We are heading to dinner." His eyes flicked to David. "Family only." Jessica finally looked at David, her eyes conflicted. "I'll be home later," she said quietly. David watched them walk away, his wife surrounded by her family, their expensive clothes and confident postures a stark contrast to his solitary figure by his father's grave. The attorney's card burned in his pocket. Estate? What could that possibly mean? David returned to the empty apartment he shared with Jessica, his footsteps echoing against bare walls. They'd been renting this place for 3 years, never hanging pictures or buying real furniture because Jessica's parents insisted it was temporary until they got on their feet. 3 years of Jessica saying, "Just a little longer until they see how wonderful you are." They never did. David loosened his tie and stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. 31 years old. English teacher at Westbrook High School. Son of a mechanic. Husband to a woman born into wealth. A nobody, according to his in-laws. For 3 years, David had tried to prove to the Whitmores that he deserved their daughter. 3 years of enduring subtle jabs at holiday dinners. 3 years of Richard asking when he planned to get a real career. 3 years of Patricia suggesting therapists for Jessica's obvious depression from a marrying down. 3 years of Jessica's smile growing dimmer. He splashed cold water on his face. His deepest fear stared back at him from the mirror, that maybe they were right. Maybe he would never be more than the poor teacher Jessica settled for. Maybe love wasn't enough. His phone buzzed with a text from Ray, his father's best friend. "You okay, son?" David wasn't okay. He hadn't been okay for months. The only person who truly believed in his marriage had been his father. Love doesn't care about bank accounts, Michael Chen had told him just 3 weeks ago, before the cancer took him. Remember that when they try to tell you otherwise. David heard the front door open, Jessica returning from her family dinner. He tucked the attorney's card deeper into his pocket. "How was dinner?" he asked as she set her purse down. "Fine." Her voice was distant, practiced. The voice she used when lying. Jessica Whitmore Chen had once been passionate about helping others, a social worker with dreams of opening a youth center in the poor part of town where David taught. Now she worked at her father's investment firm, her idealism replaced with designer clothes and silent dinners. "Brandon's friend Marcus asked about you," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Marcus?" The hedge fund manager her family constantly reminded her she should have married. "I'm sure he did," David said quietly. Jessica brushed past him. "I'm tired. I think I'll sleep in the guest room tonight." Without explanation. Without even looking at him. He wanted to ask why. He wanted to demand answers. Instead, he watched her walk away, wondering when exactly they'd become strangers. David sat alone in the kitchen, opening his laptop to grade sophomore essays on The Great Gatsby. The irony wasn't lost on him, teaching about a man destroyed by wealth and class divisions. His phone rang. Richard Whitmore's name flashed on the screen. David let it go to voicemail. Later, he listened to the message. "Jessica tells me you've been difficult lately. We should talk about what's best for her future. Call me." What's best for her future? Not their future. Her future. David closed his eyes, thinking of his father. Michael Chen had raised him alone after his mother died in childbirth. Worked 60-hour weeks at his small auto shop to put David through state college. Never complained. Never asked for recognition. And yet there had always been something mysterious about his father's past. When David asked about grandparents or where he grew up, Michael would simply say he'd left a different life behind before David was born. He'd changed the subject, turning up Chinese folk songs on the radio and teaching David phrases in Mandarin that David never quite mastered. Now David wondered what other secrets his father had kept. The next morning, David dressed carefully in his best shirt, still not expensive enough for the Whitmores, but clean and pressed. He drove downtown to the address on Thomas Brennan's card, passing the glittering office building where Richard Whitmore conducted his real estate empire, where Jessica now spent her days learning to become someone she never wanted to be. The law offices of Brennan and Associates occupied the top floor of a sleek high-rise. The receptionist led David to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Thomas Brennan stood to greet him, gesturing to a leather chair. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Chen." "David, please." "David." Thomas settled behind his desk. "Before we begin, I have a question for you." He studied David carefully. "Did your father ever mention the name Michael Jong?" David shook his head slowly. "No." "Who's that?" Thomas Brennan's expression softened. "That's who your father was before he became Michael Chen." As David's eyes widened, Thomas slid a folder across the desk. "I think it's time you learned who your father really was, and what he left behind." Thomas Brennan opened the folder and removed a faded photograph. "This is your father, circa 1978. David stared at the image, a young Asian man in an expensive suit, standing beside a sleek sports car outside a sprawling estate. He looked confident, wealthy, and exactly like his father. "I don't understand," David whispered. "Your father was born Michael Jong, only son of Henry Jong, founder of Jong Technologies. Thomas let that sink in. One of the pioneering tech companies in Silicon Valley in the late 70s and 80s. David shook his head. That's impossible. My dad fixed cars for a living. After he walked away from a fortune, yes, Thomas continued. When he was 25, Michael had a profound disagreement with his father over business ethics. Henry Jong wanted to cut corners on product safety to maximize profits. Your father refused to be part of it. Thomas slid another document across the desk, a legal name change from Michael Jong to Michael Chen, dated 40 years earlier. He changed his name, moved across the country, and started over as a mechanic. But there was one thing he couldn't legally walk away from: his trust fund. David's heart pounded. Trust fund. Your grandfather established it when Michael was born. Even after their falling out, Henry couldn't touch it. Michael refused to access the money himself, never touched a penny of it. But he also never legally disconnected from it. Thomas produced another document, a bank statement. For 40 years, that trust fund has been growing, managed conservatively by the family office. As of last month, the balance stands at $2.3 million. David felt the room spin. 2.3 million. Your father's will is quite clear. Thomas handed him yet another document. Everything goes to you, his sole heir, with one condition. He pointed to a handwritten note attached to the will. David read his father's familiar handwriting: to my son David, use this wisely and with integrity. Remember that what makes a man wealthy isn't what's in his bank account, but what's in his heart. Thomas leaned forward. The transfer process has already begun. The funds will be in your account within 72 hours. David sat in stunned silence, his father's words echoing in his mind. Your father kept this secret for a reason, Thomas said quietly. He wanted you to understand the value of honest work before you knew about this. What you do with this information is up to you, but I'd suggest you consider carefully who you tell, and when. Did he ever consider using the money himself? David asked. When he got sick. I asked him the same question, Thomas replied. He said, what good is extending a life if you compromise how you lived it? David's eyes burned with tears. Even dying, his father had maintained his principles. There's something else, Thomas added, pulling out a sealed envelope. Your father asked me to give you this after you learned everything. David took the envelope with trembling fingers but didn't open it. Take some time, Thomas advised. This is a lot to process. Walking out of the lawyer's office into the bright sunlight, David felt disoriented. His father, the humble mechanic who clipped coupons and bought store-brand cereal, had been sitting on millions. The man who wore the same work boots for a decade until they fell apart could have bought a new pair every day. He drove to a park and sat on a bench, turning the sealed envelope over and over in his hands before finally opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with his father's handwriting. David, if you're reading this, you now know the truth. I didn't keep this secret to deceive you, but to protect you from the curse of unearned privilege. Money doesn't make a man, his choices do. I chose to walk away from wealth that came with moral compromise. Now you have a choice too. This money is neither good nor bad, it's a tool. What matters is how you use it. Remember who you were before you knew about it. That person is who you really are. I love you, son. Dad. David's phone buzzed with a text. Jessica. The message contained a photo, the entire Whitmore family at Bellini's, the exclusive restaurant downtown. Richard and Patricia, Brandon and his wife Courtney, and Jessica, her smile tight and forced. Brandon's arm was draped possessively around her shoulders. The text read, having dinner at my parents' tonight. Don't wait up. David stared at the image. They were celebrating something. He zoomed in on Jessica's face, the slight crease between her eyebrows, the tension in her jaw. She wasn't happy, just compliant. Another text arrived, this one from Brandon, taking care of Jessica tonight. Don't worry about her. The subtext was clear: you're not needed. You're not wanted. You're not family. David shoved the phone back in his pocket, his mind racing. For the first time in their marriage, he had the power to shock them all, to announce his sudden wealth and watch their faces change from disdain to surprise. But Thomas Brennan's words echoed in his head: consider carefully who you tell, and when. And his father's final advice: remember who you were before you knew about it. That person is who you really are. David made his decision. He wouldn't tell anyone, not yet. For once, he wanted to see how his wife and her family treated him when they thought nothing had changed. As he drove home to an empty apartment, David realized that the inheritance wasn't just money. It was the truth. The next week unfolded like a psychological experiment, David silently observing his marriage through new eyes. With each passing day, the truth became clearer and more painful. Monday morning, David made coffee as Jessica rushed to get ready for work. "Richard wants me in early for the investors' meeting," she said, barely looking at him. "Don't forget it's the Carmichael fundraiser tonight." The Carmichael fundraiser, an annual charity event hosted by Richard's biggest client. Every year, David endured it like a trial by fire. "I remember," David said. Jessica paused at the door. "Maybe wear your navy suit? The one my mom bought you last Christmas." Her voice was gentle but carried an unmistakable message: please don't embarrass us. That evening, David arrived at the fundraiser to find Jessica already there, champagne in hand, surrounded by her father's business associates. She introduced him to the group without quite meeting his eyes. "This is my husband, David. He teaches English at Westbrook." One man raised an eyebrow. "Teaching? Noble profession. Doesn't pay much though, does it?" Before David could respond, Richard appeared, clapping the man on the shoulder. "David's very dedicated. Not everyone is cut out for the business world." Jessica laughed nervously. David noticed she'd switched her wedding ring to her right hand, something she'd never done before. As the evening progressed, he began taking mental notes of every slight, every dismissive comment, every moment Jessica failed to defend him. By Thursday, David had started a document on his laptop titled The Truth. In it, he recorded everything: Patricia suggesting over lunch that Jessica should do something with her life while she's still young, with a pointed glance at David. Brandon joking at dinner about hiring Jessica a divorce attorney as an early Christmas gift. Richard pulling David aside to say, "A real man wouldn't hold my daughter back from her potential." Most damning was what Jessica didn't do, didn't say, didn't challenge. She'd become a silent witness to his slow execution. On Friday night, David drove to Ray's auto shop. Ray had been his father's best friend for 30 years, the only person besides Thomas Brennan who might know the truth. Ray was closing up when David arrived. The older man's face softened with concern. "You look like hell, kid." "I need to talk," David said. They sat in Ray's cluttered office, surrounded by invoices and the smell of motor oil. David explained everything: the inheritance, his father's secret past, the Whitmore's escalating hostility, and Jessica's apparent surrender to her family's influence. Ray listened silently, then pulled a bottle of whiskey from his desk drawer. "Your dad kept that bottle here for emergencies," he explained, pouring 2 fingers into mismatched glasses. "I'd say this qualifies." "Did you know?" David asked. "About the money?" Ray shook his head. "Not the details. But Mike told me once that he walked away from more than most people earn in a lifetime. Said it was the best decision he ever made." Ray sipped his whiskey. "He told me I gave up millions because it was the right thing to do, and I never regretted it. I got something better: I got to raise my son to be a good man. That's worth more than any inheritance." "What should I do, Ray?" Ray studied him. "Your dad lived 30 years as a rich man and 40 years as a poorer man. He was happier poor. Think about what that means before you tell anyone." David nodded slowly. "The Whitmores think wealth is everything. And if you suddenly have money, they might treat me differently, but for the wrong reasons." Ray pointed at him. Exactly. Money doesn't just reveal who other people are, it reveals who you are. When David returned home, the apartment was dark except for a single lamp in the living room. Jessica sat on the couch, still in her work clothes, eyes red from crying. "We need to talk," she said. David sat across from her, the coffee table between them like a demilitarized zone. "I think we need a trial separation," Jessica whispered, not meeting his eyes. "Why?" The word hung in the air. "My family is concerned about my happiness." Her voice sounded rehearsed. "They think I've been depressed, that maybe we rushed into marriage, that maybe we want different things." "And what do you think, Jessica?" Her hands trembled. "I don't know anymore. I love you, but everything's so complicated." "Your family made it complicated." Jessica finally looked at him. "They're just concerned. They're controlling you." She flinched. "That's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you made a decision without checking with them first? When was the last time you defended me when they insulted me right to my face?" Tears slid down her cheeks. "You don't understand the pressure." "I understand perfectly," David cut in. "You have to choose, Jessica. Your family or our marriage. Because I'm done being the punching bag everyone gets to hit when they need to feel superior." She stared at him, shocked by his directness. "When did you become so cold?" "When I realized I'm the only one fighting for us." Jessica stood abruptly. "I need space to think. I'm going to stay with my parents this weekend." As she packed an overnight bag, David watched silently, the knowledge of his inheritance burning in his mind. One word could change everything, could make the Whitmores reassess him instantly. But would it save his marriage, or just reveal how conditional their acceptance was? After Jessica left, David opened his laptop and found something unexpected. Jessica had forgotten to log out of her email. His cursor hovered over the inbox. It felt wrong to invade her privacy, but after everything that had happened. His eyes caught a subject line from Brandon: "Marcus is perfect for her?" David clicked. The email contained details of dinners Jessica had apparently attended without him. References to late-night conversations. Suggestions that once she's free from him she could start fresh with someone worthy. Attached was a photo of Jessica with a man David didn't recognize, handsome, expensively dressed. They were laughing together at what looked like a restaurant. The caption from Brandon: "See how happy she looks without him." David closed the laptop, his decision made. He would hire a private investigator, not to catch Jessica in anything, but to understand what was really happening when she wasn't with him. He needed the full truth before deciding what to do with his new wealth. Because money couldn't fix a marriage that might already be broken beyond repair. David met Alan Reeves at a coffee shop 3 blocks from his apartment. The private investigator was nothing like the trench-coated stereotype, just an ordinary-looking man in his 50s with observant eyes and a neutral expression. "I can follow your wife for 3 days, Reeves explained, sliding a contract across the table. "Standard rate is $500 per day, plus expenses." David hesitated, pen hovering over the signature line. "I'm not trying to catch her doing anything. I just need to know what's happening." Reeves nodded without judgment. "Most clients say that. Some even mean it." 3 days later, David's phone rang at 7:14 a.m. Reeves' voice was matter-of-fact: "We need to meet. I have something you should see in person." They met at the same coffee shop. Reeves placed a manila envelope on the table. "Before you look at this, I want to be clear, what I found isn't what you expected." David's stomach tightened. "Is she having an affair?" "No." Reeves' expression softened slightly. "Not even close." David opened the envelope. Inside were photographs: Jessica entering a nondescript office building. Jessica sitting in what appeared to be a waiting room. Jessica coming out of the building, wiping tears from her eyes. "That's the office of Dr. Eleanor Winters," Reeves explained. "She's a marriage counselor." David flipped to the next photo, Jessica having lunch with a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a professional demeanor. That's Dr. Winters. They met outside of regular appointment hours. Reeves handed him a small digital recorder. I was at the next table. You should listen. David pressed play. Jessica's voice emerged, soft but clear. Don't know how to tell him that I'm trapped. My father threatened to cut me off completely if I don't leave David. Not just financially, he said he'd make sure I never work in this city again. Dr. Winter's calm voice responded, and is financial security worth sacrificing your marriage? It's not about money, Jessica sounded frustrated. It's about control. They've controlled every aspect of my life. I don't know how to stand up to them. I never have. What about David? Have you told him what you're going through? A pause, then Jessica's voice broke, I'm ashamed. I let them treat him horribly for 3 years. I've been weak and cowardly. I don't know if he can ever forgive me for not defending him. I'm not even sure why he stays. David's hand trembled as he stopped the recording. There's more. Reeves nodded grimly. The expensive dinners you found receipts for? She wasn't with Marcus. She was meeting with this woman. He slid another photo across the table. Jessica sitting across from a sharp-featured woman in a power suit. Diane Levinson, divorce attorney. One of the best in the state. Before David could react, Reeves added, but not for what you think. Keep listening. David pressed play again. Just need to understand my options, Jessica was saying. If I leave my family, what legal recourse do they have? Can they really destroy my career? Diane Levinson's voice was crisp and professional. They can make things difficult, but they can't legally prevent you from working. The question is whether you're prepared for the consequences. I love my husband, Jessica said firmly. I've always loved David. But I'm so weak. I let my family poison everything. The recording ended. David stared at the photo spread before him, his entire understanding of the past month shifting dramatically. There's one more thing, Reeves said, his professional detachment slipping. I don't normally do this, but... He pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Her therapist gave her an assignment to write in a journal. She was writing in it at the coffee shop yesterday. I managed to photograph a page. The paper contained a photo of Jessica's familiar handwriting. I love David. I've always loved David. But I'm so weak. I let my family poison everything. I don't know if he can ever forgive me for not defending him. I'm so ashamed of who I've become. I'm not even sure why he stays. If I had any courage at all, I would stand up to them. Tell them they can keep their money, their connections, their approval. David is worth more than all of it. But every time I try, I freeze. 29 years of conditioning doesn't break in a day. Dr. Winters says I need to make a choice, continue living for my family's approval or start living for my own happiness. When she puts it that way, it seems so simple. But they're all I've ever known. What if I lose them and David thinks I'm pathetic for taking so long to choose him? What if I end up with nothing? David folded the paper, his vision blurring with tears. All this time, he'd thought Jessica was pulling away, when she'd actually been fighting an internal war he knew nothing about. There's something you should know about her family, Reeves said, lowering his voice. I did some digging. Richard Whitmore has been systematically manipulating your wife. He's been telling colleagues that she's suffering from depression and poor judgment due to her unfortunate marriage. He's been working to isolate her professionally so she remains dependent on him. And Patricia. Worse in some ways. She's been telling Jessica that you're clearly depressed and holding her back. That Jessica needs to save you from yourself by leaving. David's mind raced. It wasn't Jessica who had betrayed him, it was her family systematically destroying their marriage through emotional manipulation and threats. What about Brandon? David asked. He's just following his father's lead. But the Marcus situation was his idea, trying to create a self-fulfilling prophecy by convincing both of you that the other was cheating. David stared into his cold coffee. All this time, I thought she was slipping away from me. From what I've seen, Reeve said quietly, she's been trying to find her way back to you. David paid the investigator and walked to a nearby park, trying to process everything. He sat on a bench, watching children play, oblivious to the complexities of adult relationships. The inheritance from his father now took on new significance. It wasn't just money, it was power. Power to free Jessica from her family's financial control. Power to prove that their marriage was never about wealth or status. But using it this way felt complicated. His father had walked away from money on principle. Would using the inheritance to fight back against the Whitmores honor his father's legacy, or corrupt it? As he wrestled with this question, his phone rang. Brandon's name appeared on the screen. David hesitated, then answered. "We need to talk about Jessica," Brandon said without preamble. "She's not thinking clearly." "What do you mean?" David kept his voice neutral, though his hand tightened around the phone. "She's obviously confused about what she wants. Dad thinks it would be best if you signed some papers. Make this easy on everyone." "Papers? Divorce papers? Nothing complicated. You don't have any assets to split anyway." Brandon's voice was casual, as if discussing a minor business transaction. "Jessica's staying with us now. She doesn't want to talk to you directly, it's too emotional for her." David thought of the recordings of Jessica's journal. "I'd like to hear that from her." Brandon laughed. "Not going to happen. Look, be reasonable. You had to know this was temporary. Jessica belongs in our world, not yours." David's free hand clenched into a fist. "Put her on the phone, Brandon. She doesn't want to talk to you. Accept it." The line went dead. David stared at his phone, rage and clarity washing over him in equal measure. The Whitmores weren't just trying to end his marriage, they were holding Jessica hostage, cutting her off from him completely. The trial separation had been their idea, not hers. For the first time, David truly understood what his father meant about integrity. It wasn't just about walking away from money, it was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. His father's inheritance wasn't a test of David's character. It was a tool to save the woman he loved from people who saw her as property, not a person. David called Thomas Brennan's office. "I need to access my inheritance," he said when the attorney came on the line. "All of it. Right now." The battle for his marriage had truly begun. The next morning, David woke to aggressive knocking. He opened his apartment door to find a stern-faced man in a suit. "David Chen." The man didn't wait for confirmation. "You've been served." He thrust a thick envelope into David's hands and walked away. David's hand shook as he opened the envelope. "Divorce papers. The plaintiff, Jessica Whitmore Chen. The grounds, irreconcilable differences and emotional distress." But as he read further, his confusion grew. The document painted him as financially controlling, emotionally manipulative, and unstable. It claimed Jessica had fled the marital home in fear for her well-being and was under significant duress due to the defendant's unpredictable behavior. None of it was true. At the bottom, Jessica's signature looked shaky, uncertain, nothing like her usual confident script. The filing attorney was Maxwell Hammond, Richard Whitmore's personal lawyer. David's phone rang. "Thomas Brennan. I processed the transfer," the attorney said. "The funds are now in your account. But David, something's happened that you should know about. The Whitmore's lawyer contacted my office this morning, asking about your father's estate." David froze. How would they know about that? They don't, not specifically. They are fishing. Standard practice in high-net-worth divorces, looking for hidden assets. But the timing concerns me. After hanging up, David tried calling Jessica. Her phone went straight to voicemail. He tried her work number. The receptionist informed him that Ms. Whitmore is unavailable and not accepting calls from Mr. Chen. Ms. Whitmore. Not Ms. Whitmore Chen. They had already erased him. David's phone buzzed with a text from his school principal, "Need to see you in my office. 3 p.m. today. Urgent." The day spiraled from there. At school, Principal Grayson's expression was grave as David entered her office. "David, we've received some concerning information." She slid a formal complaint across her desk. "The Whitmore family has filed this with the school board. They're alleging you've been emotionally abusive toward their daughter, creating a hostile environment that's affected your work performance." David stared at the document in disbelief. "That's completely false. There's more." Grayson couldn't meet his eyes. "They've suggested you've been financially manipulative, using school resources for personal gain." "What? That's absurd." "They've requested a formal investigation. Until it's completed, the board has decided to place you on administrative leave. You're firing me. Suspending you. With pay, for now." Her voice softened. "David, what's going on? This isn't like you." "It's not me at all," he said quietly. "It's them." Leaving the school, David felt eyes on him. Colleagues whispered as he cleared out his desk. Students stared. Word had already spread. Outside, he found his car vandalized, abuser spray-painted across the driver's side door. Brandon. Had to be. At home, David discovered his email had been flooded with messages from concerned friends and colleagues who had heard about the situation. The Whitmores had been busy, spreading rumors, planting seeds of doubt, isolating him completely. He checked social media and found Patricia had posted a vague but pointed message about supporting victims of emotional abuse with Jessica tagged. Comments expressed sympathy for Jessica and outrage toward the unnamed abuser. David's phone rang. "Ray. Kid, what the hell is happening? Jessica's brother just came by the shop, telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown. Said Jessica's afraid of you." "None of it's true, Ray. They're trying to destroy me." "I know that," Ray said firmly. "I know you. But they're moving fast and they're moving dirty." By evening, David felt the walls closing in. His wife had been taken. His job suspended. His reputation in tatters. The Whitmores had executed a perfectly coordinated attack, leveraging their wealth, connections, and social standing to annihilate him. With no job, no wife, and his name being dragged through mud, David faced exactly what he'd always feared, being nothing, having nothing, proving the Whitmores right. He sat on the floor of his empty apartment, surrounded by the divorce papers and complaint forms, when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Dr. Winters. Jessica's therapist. She doesn't know I'm contacting you. She's not okay. They've taken her phone, car keys. She's effectively under house arrest at the Whitmore estate. She didn't file those papers voluntarily. Call me." David called immediately. "I'm breaking every ethical rule right now," Dr. Winters said without preamble, "but I'm more concerned about Jessica's safety than my license. She didn't want this divorce. From what I can gather, they pressured her to sign those papers while she was sedated." Sedated? David's blood ran cold. Richard Whitmore has a friend who's a psychiatrist. He convinced Jessica she needed something to calm her anxiety. I believe they're keeping her compliant with medication she doesn't need. That's illegal. And very hard to prove when the family controls access to her. David, I don't know what's happening, but this went from family pressure to something much darker very quickly. After the call, David paced the apartment, feeling powerless despite the millions now sitting in his account. Money couldn't help if he couldn't reach Jessica. Money couldn't restore his reputation. Money couldn't fight an enemy that fought without rules or conscience. On impulse, David drove to his father's apartment. He'd been avoiding clearing it out, but now he needed something, connection, guidance, anything to pull him from the abyss. The small one-bedroom was exactly as his father had left it. Simple furniture. Bookshelves filled with history and philosophy. The lingering scent of green tea and motor oil. David sat at his father's desk, opening drawers aimlessly, not sure what he was looking for. In the bottom drawer, he found a leather-bound journal he'd never seen before. The first entry was dated 40 years earlier, the day Michael Jong became Michael Chen. David read for hours, absorbing his father's journey. The painful break from his family. The struggle to build a new life with nothing but his hands and his principles. The loneliness. The doubt. Then came an entry from the day David was born. I held my son today. Looking into his eyes, I finally understood why I walked away from that fortune. Money showed me who people really were. Losing it showed me who I really was. David will face this test too. I pray he chooses integrity over revenge, love over bitterness. Real wealth isn't in the bank, it's in knowing you did the right thing even when no one was watching. David closed the journal, tears streaming down his face. His father had faced his own darkest hour and emerged stronger, guided by principles that couldn't be bought or sold. Another entry caught his eye, dated just weeks before his father died. David thinks I fought the cancer hard for his sake. The truth is, I've been ready to go for some time. What kept me here was making sure the inheritance would be handled properly. Not the money, the real inheritance. The knowledge of who he is and where he comes from. A man who knows his true worth can never be destroyed by those who see only dollar signs. David stood, wiping his eyes, a new resolve hardening within him. The Whitmores thought they'd broken him because that's all they understood, breaking people, controlling people, measuring worth in dollars and status. But they'd never faced someone with nothing to lose and principles that couldn't be bought. David pulled out his phone and made 2 calls, first to Thomas Brennan, then to a number Dr. Winters had given him for emergencies. I need the best family law attorney in the state, he told Brennan. Not to fight Jessica. To fight for her. To the second number, he simply said, "This is David Chen. I need your help getting my wife back from people who are holding her against her will." The darkest hour had passed. Now it was time to fight back. The conference room of Levine, Stanton, and Walsh overlooked the city from 30 stories up. David sat across from Catherine Walsh, regarded as the most formidable family law attorney in the state. At 60, she radiated no-nonsense competence, her silver hair cut in a precise bob, her eyes sharp and assessing. "So," she said after David explained everything, "you want to fight a wealthy, connected family who fabricated abuse allegations against you, manipulated your wife, and are potentially keeping her sedated against her will." "Yes. And you suddenly have the financial resources to do so because your father, who lived as a mechanic, was secretly heir to a tech fortune he never touched." "That's correct." Catherine's expression didn't change. "If anyone else told me this story, I'd show them the door. But Thomas Brennan vouched for you, and he doesn't do that lightly." She tapped her pen against her legal pad. "I need to be absolutely clear about your objective here. I want to help Jessica get free from her family's control. Whether she stays with me afterward is her choice." Catherine studied him. "That's unusually selfless." "It's not selfless. I love her. I want her to be safe and make her own choices, even if that choice isn't me." Something in Catherine's expression softened slightly. "Then let's talk strategy. You're not just fighting for a divorce outcome, you're essentially trying to extract someone from an emotionally abusive environment where they're being controlled and manipulated." "Exactly. This won't be easy or clean. The Whitmores have already shown they'll fight dirty. Are you prepared for that?" David thought of his father's journal. "I'm prepared to fight the right way, with truth. They've been operating in shadows and whispers. I want everything in the open." Catherine nodded slowly. "I like your approach, but we need evidence, documented patterns of control and manipulation, proof that Jessica didn't willingly file those divorce papers, documentation of the mental health professional who's sedating her without proper evaluation. Dr. Winters, Jessica's real therapist, is willing to help. She has session recordings where Jessica explicitly states she's being pressured to leave me. Good start. What else? David pulled out his laptop. I've been documenting everything for weeks, every comment, every incident. And I have recordings from the PI that show Jessica was seeking help to stand up to her family, not trying to leave me. As he laid out all the evidence, Catherine's professional demeanor gave way to genuine concern. This is more serious than I initially thought. The level of control they're exerting borders on criminal. So you'll take the case? Yes. Catherine closed her notebook. But we need to move carefully. We're not just filing countermotions to their divorce petition. We're potentially looking at emergency orders to allow Jessica access to independent counsel and medical evaluation. What's our first step? Reputation management. The Whitmores have already begun a whisper campaign against you. We need to document and counter it without looking retaliatory. She made a call, putting it on speaker. Marcus, I need your team on something urgent. The man who answered had a calm, professional voice. What's the situation? False abuse allegations, high-profile local family, social smear campaign. We need documentation and strategic response. Classic wealthy family playbook, Marcus replied. We can have a team tracking everything by this afternoon. After the call, Catherine looked at David. Marcus Parker runs the best reputation management firm in the state. His team will monitor all social media and local gossip, documenting the Whitmore's campaign against you without engaging with it directly. As they continued planning, David's phone rang. It was Ray. Kid, something's happened. Brandon just showed up at the school board meeting to express concern about you continuing to teach. He brought letters from 3 parents who've never met you claiming their kids felt uncomfortable in your class. David's stomach tightened. They're trying to make sure I lose my job permanently. That's not all. He mentioned to several people afterward that Jessica might need a restraining order because you've been unstable since your father died. Kid, they're setting you up. Catherine, who'd been listening, interjected, this is actually helpful. They're overplaying their hand, creating a pattern of calculated destruction we can document. Mr. Chen, with your permission, I'd like Ray to work with Marcus's team. After the call, David and Catherine continued strategizing until evening. As he was leaving her office, she said, I'm curious about something. With your inheritance, you could simply walk away, start over somewhere else, live comfortably. Why fight this battle? David thought about his answer. My father walked away from wealth because staying meant compromising his integrity. I'd be walking away from someone I love who needs help. That would compromise mine. Catherine nodded approvingly. We'll talk tomorrow. In the meantime, be careful. Don't contact the Whitmores directly. Don't respond to provocations. Document everything. Driving to Ray's house, where he'd be staying to avoid being alone at the apartment, David called Thomas Brennan. I've been thinking about my father's legacy, David said. He walked away from money and family on principle. I'm fighting for my wife on the same principle, that people matter more than power or wealth. I think he'd approve, Thomas replied. Michael once told me, sometimes walking away is right, and sometimes standing your ground is right. The trick is knowing the difference. I'm standing my ground, David said firmly. Then let me help. I've prepared documents giving you full access to your inheritance. But I've also taken the liberty of establishing a trust that protects the principal. No matter what happens with this legal battle, you'll always have financial security. Thank you, Thomas. At Ray's small house, David found his father's friend had cleared out his spare bedroom and ordered pizza. They sat in Ray's cluttered living room, going through Michael Chen's belongings that Ray had saved, photographs, letters, the few mementos his father had kept from his former life. Your dad was the most principled man I ever knew, Ray said, showing David a faded photograph of his father standing beside a newly opened auto shop 30 years earlier. He could have bought 10 shops like this without blinking. Instead, he saved for years to open this one. I keep asking myself what he would do in my situation, David admitted. Ray smiled. He'd do the right thing, even if it cost him everything. But he'd also be smart about it. Your dad wasn't just principled, he was strategic. This sparked something in David's mind. Strategic. He thought about how the Whitmores operated, their careful image management, their social manipulation, their behind-the-scenes pressure tactics. They're fighting me in the shadows, David realized. Maybe I need to bring everything into the light. The next morning, David met with Catherine, Marcus, and a digital security expert named Elaine. Together, they formulated a plan not of revenge, but of truth. The Whitmores thrive on controlling the narrative, Elaine explained. Their power comes from making others believe their version of reality. So we counter with documented facts, Catherine added. Every false accusation, every manipulative action, every inconsistency in their story, all carefully preserved and ready to present not just in court, but to everyone they've been manipulating. As they finalized their approach, David's phone rang, an unfamiliar number. Mr. Chen? A young woman's voice, nervous. This is Mia. I'm the Whitmore's housekeeper. Dr. Winters gave me your number. David put the phone on speaker. Is Jessica all right? Not really. They're keeping her in the East Wing. She's not herself. Confused. They have a doctor visiting every day. Mia's voice dropped to a whisper. Mrs. Whitmore takes her phone away at night, but Jessica wrote you a note. She asked me to tell you she didn't sign those papers, not really. She said they told her it was just an agreement for therapy, but she was so dizzy from the medication. Can you get a message to her? Maybe. I have to go. They check my phone sometimes. The line went dead. David looked up at Catherine, his resolve hardening. How quickly can we move on those emergency orders? I'll file today. But David, this changes things. If they're essentially holding her against her will and medicating her without informed consent, we're beyond family court issues. What are you saying? I'm saying we may need to involve law enforcement. The Whitmores aren't just fighting dirty in a divorce, they're potentially committing crimes. David thought of Jessica, confused and trapped in her family home, being drugged to keep her compliant. The last shred of hesitation evaporated. Do whatever it takes, he said. We need to get her out of there. That afternoon, Catherine filed emergency motions requesting independent psychological evaluation for Jessica and supervised visitation. Meanwhile, Marcus's team had documented over 30 instances of the Whitmores spreading false information about David in the community. As they worked, Dr. Winters arrived with additional evidence, session notes showing Jessica's growing fear of her family's control and her desire to repair her marriage with David. I've never seen anything like this, Dr. Winters admitted. It's as if they've created an alternate reality where Jessica needs to be saved from you, when she's been telling me for months that she needs to be saved from them. By evening, their case had grown stronger. The judge had scheduled an emergency hearing for the next morning. Law enforcement had been quietly notified of the situation. The reputation management team had prepared responses to every false accusation. As David reviewed everything with Catherine, his phone buzzed with a text from Mia. Jessica saw my phone. She knows I contacted you. She said to tell you she's going to try to get out tonight. She found where they hid her car keys. David's heart raced. She's going to try to escape. Catherine immediately called their police contact. We need officers near the Whitmore estate tonight. We have reason to believe Jessica Whitmore Chen may attempt to leave a situation where she's being held and medicated against her will. As they waited for confirmation, David's phone rang. A number he didn't recognize. David. Jessica's voice was slurred but determined. I got out. I took my car. They're following me. I don't know where to go. Jessica, where are you now? I don't know. Everything's fuzzy. They gave me something. I think I see the park. Our park. The park where they'd had their first date. Jessica, listen carefully. Pull over. Stop driving right now. I'm calling the police to come help you. David, I'm sorry. I should have stood up to them. I should have. Her voice cut off with the sound of screeching tires. Jessica? Jessica! The line went dead. David stared at the phone in horror, then grabbed his keys. David, wait! Catherine called. Let the police handle this. But David was already running for the door, Ray close behind him. I'm not waiting, David called back. She needs me now. As he raced toward the park, David understood with perfect clarity what his father had meant about wealth and integrity. The money didn't matter. The legal battle didn't matter. All that mattered was reaching the woman he loved when she needed him most. David raced through the streets, his heart pounding in his chest. The park where he and Jessica had shared their first picnic, where he'd proposed on a summer evening 3 years earlier, was less than 10 minutes away. Each second stretched into eternity. His phone rang. Catherine. I've notified the police. They're sending units to the park. David, please be careful. The Whitmores are unpredictable right now. David barely heard her. As he rounded the corner to the park entrance, he saw flashing lights. A police cruiser. An ambulance. And Jessica's silver BMW, its front end crumpled against a tree. He abandoned his car half on the curb and ran toward the scene, his breath ragged. A police officer tried to intercept him. Sir, you need to stay back. That's my wife. David pushed past him. Jessica sat on the back step of the ambulance, a blanket around her shoulders. Her face was pale, her eyes unfocused, but she was conscious. When she saw David, she tried to stand. David! Her voice was faint, slurred. He rushed to her side, taking her cold hands in his. I'm here. You're safe now. A paramedic approached. She's been given some kind of sedative. We're taking her to Memorial Hospital to run tests and monitor her. Before David could respond, a black Range Rover screeched to a halt nearby. Richard and Patricia Whitmore emerged, followed by Brandon. They moved with practiced confidence toward the ambulance. Richard addressed the nearest officer. That's our daughter. She's been experiencing a psychiatric episode. We have her doctor on the way. The officer looked uncertain. Sir, we need to. I'm Richard Whitmore. He said the name as if it explained everything. In this city, it nearly did. That woman is my daughter. She's under psychiatric care and left home during a breakdown. We'll take her home now. David stepped between them and Jessica. No. She's my wife, and she left your house because you've been drugging her against her will. Patricia's face tightened with practiced concern. Officer, this is Jessica's husband. They're separating. He's been unstable since his father died. Jessica has a restraining order against him. No, I don't, Jessica managed to say, her voice stronger. They're lying. They've been controlling me. Medicating me. Richard's mask slipped for an instant, rage flashing in his eyes before he composed himself. Jessica, sweetheart, you're confused. Remember what Dr. Mercer said about your anxiety episodes. Another police car arrived. Catherine Walsh stepped out, accompanied by Dr. Winters and a uniformed police captain. The attorney moved purposefully toward the group. Captain Rodriguez, as we discussed, this is Jessica Whitmore Chen. We have reason to believe she's been held at her parents' home against her will and medicated without proper consent. The captain nodded. Mrs. Whitmore Chen, we're going to have you transported to Memorial Hospital for evaluation by independent doctors, not affiliated with your family. Richard stepped forward. Now wait just a minute. I'm Richard Whitmore. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Whitmore, Captain Rodriguez interrupted. And I know exactly what's happening here. Mrs. Whitmore Chen will be evaluated at the hospital. If your claims about her mental health are legitimate, that will be determined by unbiased medical professionals. Patricia touched her husband's arm, whispering urgently. Richard's face darkened, but he nodded stiffly. Fine. We'll follow the ambulance. Actually, Catherine interjected, I've filed for an emergency protective order preventing the Whitmores from approaching Jessica until this situation is clarified. She handed papers to Captain Rodriguez. Judge Sanderson signed it 20 minutes ago. Brandon pushed forward. This is ridiculous. She's our family. And my client, Catherine replied coolly. She can't be your client, Richard snapped. She's represented by Maxwell Hammond. A lawyer she never hired and doesn't want, Catherine countered. We have evidence she signed those papers under duress while improperly medicated. Jessica reached for David's hand. I want to go to the hospital now. With David. Jessica, be reasonable, Patricia's voice took on a brittle edge. You know David isn't good for you. Think about your future. For the first time in months, clarity shone in Jessica's eyes. My future is my choice. Not yours. The paramedics helped Jessica into the ambulance. David moved to follow, but Richard grabbed his arm. This isn't over, he hissed. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I'll destroy you. David looked at the man who had tormented him for 3 years, who had tried to destroy his marriage and reputation, who had drugged his own daughter to maintain control. No, Richard. You have no idea who you're dealing with. 3 days later, Jessica had been cleared by hospital psychiatrists, the sedatives had left her system, and she'd given detailed statements to the police about what had happened at her parents' home. Criminal charges were being considered against Dr. Mercer, the psychiatrist who had prescribed medication without proper evaluation. David and Jessica sat in Catherine's office with Dr. Winters, preparing for the meeting that would determine their future. The Whitmores have requested a private meeting, Catherine explained. Ostensibly to discuss dropping the divorce petition and resolving this situation. They're bringing their attorney. What do they really want? David asked. To regain control, Dr. Winters answered. People like the Whitmores can't function without it. Jessica squeezed David's hand. I'm scared to face them, but I need to. For myself. You don't have to do this, David assured her. We can handle everything through lawyers. She shook her head. No. I've been silent too long. I need to find my voice. Whatever you decide, I'm with you, David promised. Catherine's phone buzzed. They're here. The conference room was designed to intimidate, gleaming mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city below. Richard, Patricia, and Brandon sat on one side with Maxwell Hammond, their attorney. Their expressions ranged from Patricia's icy composure to Richard's barely contained fury to Brandon's nervous fidgeting. Catherine had arranged for David, Jessica, and Dr. Winters to enter last, a small psychological advantage. As they took their seats, Maxwell Hammond opened a folder. We're prepared to drop the divorce petition and abuse allegations in exchange for a complete non-disclosure agreement regarding recent misunderstandings. His voice was smooth, practiced. The Whitmores are concerned only with Jessica's well-being and the family's privacy. Catherine raised an eyebrow. Misunderstandings? Is that what we're calling holding someone against their will and drugging them now? Those are libelous accusations, Richard cut in. Jessica was receiving appropriate care during an emotional crisis. Dad, stop. Jessica's voice was quiet but firm. We all know what happened. What happened, Patricia said tightly, is that we tried to protect you from a marriage that was destroying you. The only thing destroying me was trying to please you. Jessica met her mother's gaze. I've spent my entire life trying to be the daughter you wanted instead of the person I am. We gave you everything, Richard's voice rose. A perfect life. Opportunities most people would kill for. And you throw it away before him. He jabbed a finger at David. Ain't nobody with nothing to offer you. The room fell silent. David felt an odd calm settle over him. This was the moment, the culmination of 3 years of judgment, of being found wanting, of being deemed unworthy. You're wrong, Richard. David's voice was steady. I have plenty to offer Jessica. Love. Respect. Freedom to be herself. Richard sneered. Beautiful sentiments. Too bad they don't pay the bills. Actually, David said quietly, I can manage the bills quite well now. Catherine slid a folder across the table. Financial disclosure. Required for the divorce proceedings you initiated. Perhaps you'd like to review my client's assets. Maxwell Hammond opened the folder, his expression shifting from smug certainty to confusion. He whispered something to Richard, whose face reddened. This is absurd. Where would a high school teacher get this kind of money? My father, David answered simply. Michael Chen. Or as he was born, Michael Jong. Richard's expression froze. Jong. Jong Technologies. The same. David nodded. My father walked away from the family business 40 years ago over ethical disagreements with his father. He changed his name, moved across the country, and lived as an auto mechanic. But he never legally renounced his trust fund. When he died, he left me $2.3 million. The shock on the Whitmore's faces would have been satisfying if David cared about such things anymore. But looking at them now, their carefully constructed facade cracking, he felt only pity. I've had this money for 2 weeks, David continued. Since shortly after my father's funeral. The funeral where you stood 10 feet from his casket making plans for Jessica's life after our divorce. Patricia paled. Brandon looked away. Richard's jaw clenched. I didn't tell anyone, not even Jessica, because I wanted to see who you all really were. And you showed me. David's voice remained calm. You showed me exactly who you are when you think someone has nothing. Jessica reached for David's hand. When David told me about the inheritance yesterday, do you know what my first thought was? Relief that I could finally leave the firm without worrying about you cutting me off financially. My second thought was how little it actually mattered. Of course it matters, Patricia snapped. Money always matters. No, Mom. That's your truth, not mine. Jessica's voice grew stronger. I never cared about David's bank account. I cared that he saw me, really saw me, when all you saw was an extension of yourselves. Richard recovered his composure, a calculating look replacing his shock. Well, this changes things considerably. Perhaps we've been hasty in our judgment of David's suitability. Does it change things, Richard? David asked. Does having money suddenly make me worthy of respect? Worthy of your daughter? Richard had the decency to look uncomfortable. Business is business. Family is family. We want what's best for Jessica. No, Jessica said firmly. You want what's best for yourselves. What fits your vision of the perfect family? I'm done living for your approval. Brandon spoke for the first time. Jess, don't be dramatic. We can work this out now that circumstances have changed. The circumstances haven't changed, Brandon. David is the same person he was 2 weeks ago. The same person you mocked and undermined. The only difference is now he has money. Jessica stood, her voice clear and strong. Here's what's going to happen. The divorce petition will be withdrawn immediately. Any rumors you've spread about David will be publicly corrected. You will stay away from us until we decide if and when we want contact. Patricia's face hardened. And if we don't agree? Catherine slid another folder forward. Then we proceed with criminal charges for unlawful detention and drugging Jessica against her will. We file civil suits for defamation and interference with David's employment. We make public every text, email, and recorded conversation documenting your campaign against this marriage. The room fell silent. Richard and Maxwell conferred in whispers. Finally, Richard straightened his tie and forced a tight smile. We'll withdraw the petition. No need for unpleasantness. He looked at David with newfound respect, the kind reserved for equals in wealth, if not in character. Perhaps once things settle down, we can start fresh. Perhaps, David said noncommittally. As the Whitmores prepared to leave, Patricia hesitated, then turned to Jessica. Her carefully maintained facade cracked, revealing something vulnerable beneath. I came from nothing, you know, she said quietly. My father was a janitor. My mother cleaned houses. I swore my children would never know that insecurity. Her voice trembled slightly. I thought I was protecting you. Jessica's expression softened marginally. By controlling me? By making me afraid to disappoint you. By making sure you never had to struggle like I did. Patricia's eyes glistened. I became what I feared, didn't I? For the first time, David saw the woman beneath the perfect exterior, someone shaped by her own fears and insecurities, who had transferred those same anxieties to her daughter. Maybe someday we can talk about this, Jessica said, not unkindly. But right now, I need space to heal. Richard took Patricia's arm. Come on. We're done here. His eyes met David's, pride warring with shame. This isn't over. Yes, it is, David replied evenly. Your choice is simple, accept Jessica's terms and perhaps eventually rebuild some kind of relationship with your daughter, or continue fighting and lose her forever. Decide what matters more, your pride or your family. As the Whitmores left, Jessica collapsed back into her chair, tears streaming down her face, not tears of sadness, but of relief and release. It's over, she whispered. Really over. David knelt beside her chair. No, it's just beginning. 6 months later, the morning sun filtered through new curtains in a modest craftsman home on the outskirts of the city. David stood at the kitchen counter, grading papers while the coffee brewed. The house wasn't extravagant, 3 bedrooms, a small yard, enough space to grow into but nothing ostentatious. Jessica entered the kitchen wearing sweatpants and one of David's old t-shirts, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She looked younger, lighter, the constant tension that had marked her features for years completely gone. Morning, she said, pressing a kiss to his cheek before pouring coffee into her favorite mug, a chipped ceramic one with the world's okayest social worker printed on it. A gift from the teens at the community center where she now worked. How did you sleep? David asked. No nightmares. 3 weeks now. She smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes and reminded David of the woman he'd fallen in love with before her family's influence had dimmed her light. Their life had found a new rhythm after the confrontation with the Whitmores. They'd used the inheritance strategically, first paying off the student loans that had kept Jessica financially dependent on her family, then buying this house that was entirely theirs. David had established a scholarship fund in Michael Chen's name at Westbrook High, providing college funding for first-generation students. They'd invested the rest conservatively, following the same prudent approach Michael had maintained for decades. But most importantly, they lived on their salaries, not the inheritance. David had returned to teaching at a new school across town, quickly becoming a favorite among students. Jessica had left her father's firm and returned to social work, specializing in helping young adults from controlling family situations, healing herself by helping others with similar wounds. Therapy at for today? David confirmed, closing his grade book. Jessica nodded. Dr. Winters says we're making excellent progress. They attended couples counseling weekly, rebuilding trust and communication after years of external pressure had nearly destroyed them. Did you see the invitation? Jessica asked, gesturing toward an envelope on the counter. David picked it up, heavyweight cream paper, formal typography. Brandon's baby shower. Courtney's due in 2 months. Jessica stirred cream into her coffee. We don't have to go. Their relationship with the Whitmores had evolved differently with each family member. Patricia had reached out first, attending therapy herself and making genuine efforts to understand the damage she'd caused. She and Jessica now met for lunch occasionally, stilted, careful conversations that were slowly rebuilding some form of relationship. Richard maintained his distance, his pride still wounded. He'd sent a brief email acknowledging that he'd perhaps been overzealous in his concerns but stopped short of a genuine apology. Jessica didn't push for more, understanding that her father might never fully change. Brandon had been the surprise. After the confrontation, he distanced himself from his father's influence and reached out to Jessica separately. His wife's pregnancy had sparked a re-evaluation of family dynamics he didn't want to perpetuate. "I think we should go," David said. "Not for them. For us. To show ourselves how far we've come." Jessica's eyes softened. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." He smiled, thinking of his father. Later that afternoon, they drove to the cemetery, a monthly ritual they'd established. They placed fresh flowers on Michael Chen's grave, simple white carnations, nothing flashy. "I've been thinking about your father a lot lately," Jessica said as they stood hand in hand before the headstone. "About the choice he made to walk away from wealth and privilege." "What about it?" "He didn't just walk away from money. He walked away from power, the power to control others, to impose his will. He chose freedom instead, the freedom to live by his own values." She squeezed David's hand. "It's what we did too." David nodded. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was the truth about choice and integrity. Dad could have used that money any time, lived comfortably, avoided working 60-hour weeks. But he chose a different kind of wealth. "I never properly thanked him," Jessica said quietly. "For the money?" "No." She smiled. "For raising a man who knew his own worth. For teaching you that love isn't about what you have, it's about who you choose to be." She placed her hand on the headstone. "Thank you for giving me the husband I didn't deserve but desperately needed." They stood in comfortable silence before walking back to the car, arms linked, leaning into each other. That evening, as Jessica prepared dinner, David sat on their back porch looking at the small garden they'd planted together. His phone buzzed with a text from Ray, "Found another box of your dad's things in the shop storage. Stop by when you can." David smiled. Even now, his father was still revealing himself piece by piece. Jessica joined him on the porch, handing him a glass of iced tea. "What's that smile about?" "Just thinking about how differently everything turned out from what I expected." He looked at her. 6 months ago, I thought I was losing everything that mattered. And now? Now I understand what Dad meant about real wealth." He pulled her gently onto his lap. "It's not the money in our account or the house or any of that. It's this, us, building something real together. Making our own choices." Jessica rested her head against his shoulder. "We're renewing our vows next month. Any second thoughts?" "Only that we should have done it sooner." He kissed her forehead. "This time with only people who truly love us there. And a better photographer," Jessica laughed. "Those wedding photos your cousin took were terrible." As the sun set over their modest backyard, casting long shadows across the vegetable garden they'd planted together, David reflected on everything that had happened since his father's funeral. The inheritance had changed their lives, not because of the money itself, but because of what it revealed in everyone around them. Richard had shown that his respect was contingent on wealth. Patricia had demonstrated that her values were built on fear. Brandon had proven capable of growth when separated from his father's toxic influence. And Jessica had found the strength to choose love over conditioning. Most importantly, David had discovered his father's true legacy, not the $2.3 million in the bank, but the priceless example of a life lived with integrity. "What are you thinking about?" Jessica asked, noticing his contemplative expression. "Something my father wrote in his journal," David replied. "Money showed me who people really were. Losing it showed me who I really was." Jessica considered this. "And what did having it show you?" David smiled. "That sometimes the person who walked away simply made space for the life you deserved all along." And in that moment, with the woman he loved in his arms and the hard-won peace they'd fought for surrounding them, David knew that his father had given him the greatest inheritance possible, not wealth, but wisdom. The understanding that true value never depended on a bank balance but on the courage to live by one's principles, even when it cost you everything. because sometimes, losing everything was the only way to gain what truly mattered. Before I end this story, I want to thank you all for staying with me this entire hour. If you connected with David and Jessica's journey, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world, and it helps me continue sharing stories that matter. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. What resonated with you most? Your perspective adds so much to our community here. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't defined by what others think of you, but by the integrity with which you live your life.